Welcome, everyone. I'm Jonathan Malloy from Carleton University, and I want to welcome you to this session here on leading change to prepare graduate students for diverse careers. It's sponsored, of course, by the Center for Higher Education Research Development at the University of Manitoba. And so I really want to thank Tara DeCastro and Paul Jenkins and Kathy Matthews, who are behind the scenes putting all this together while we sit here and present. So I want to thank CHURD and the University of Manitoba for hosting this. Maybe, Lena, I'll let you briefly introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'm very happy to join you. I'm Lolene Berdahl. I am now the Executive Director of the Johnson Chayama Graduate School of Public Policy. So I uniquely am appointed at two universities, and I have gone from being an arts faculty member to arts and science faculty member to being part of a professional school, and so I have numerous points of interest in graduate education, and I'm very excited to have this discussion.
Great. All right, so we do have a presentation, as you can see. So what we're going to do is we are going to give our presentation first. Hopefully it'll be about 20 minutes or so, we think. And then there'll be lots of time for questions and discussion. We will ask that you, if you have questions, please post them in the chat while we're talking or afterwards. It doesn't matter, and we'll try and field them that way. So please sit through our presentation, think about all the things you want to ask, and please write them down as we're talking. Write them down in the chat. We'll respond to them afterwards, and hopefully we'll have a great discussion. Okay, super. Okay. So I'm going to begin right away with a summary of really what we're looking at today and what we want to say here. We want to talk, of course, very much about PhD students and graduate careers, and we want to start on the basics that PhDs in both disciplines aspire to academic jobs, but positions are limited. I think that's a fact which I think most people who signed up today are well aware of. In recent years, I've seen a lot of interest in non-academic PhD career paths, and universities are investing in graduate professional development. And again, I know a number of people here are very much part of that and are quite involved in those efforts here. What we want to talk about today here is we want to first talk about some of our own research that we've been doing for the last few years on this topic, particularly at the department and supervisor level, and particularly in the Department of Political Science. We want to talk about some of the research that we've done, much of which we've already published. But we wanted to put it in more of a leadership dimension of this. And we want to focus particularly on the fact that there's a lot of awareness and concern about this issue at the unit and supervisor level. A lot of people know this thing. They might have known it 10 years ago. There's a lot more awareness now. But opinions about the appropriate responses are mixed, and there are a lot of capacity and coordination issues which are more difficult to overcome. And so we want to frame this talk really a bit. How can university leaders of whatever stage and level of any kind, how can they lead change to address this issue? How can they overcome particularly these capacity and coordination issues and figure what is the appropriate response to this issue? That's basically a summary of what we're going to be looking at today. So the starting point, and I won't belabor this too much, again, I think this audience knows it fairly well, as I said, is that most students in most PhD programs do aspire to academic positions. And there's a long-standing imbalance between the number of PhDs produced and the number of available academic jobs in most disciplines, not all, but certainly most there. And even though a lot of labor market prospects find that PhDs do better in the long run, there's often very difficult periods of adjustment after graduation, and this leads to low morale and slow completion rates. So that's our starting point. We think this is a starting point that most of our audience accepts, so we're not going to spend a lot of time proving it, but we want to talk about, again, the response to this issue. As I said a moment ago, universities are really, many universities, I think really all universities in some way, are actively seeking to help improve this situation through professional development in particular, trying to respond to this, bringing in more non-academic job training and things across multiple units. And so you see we have a little universe here of different entities in the university, whether it's university career centers, graduate faculties and professional development staff, line deans and faculties, department chairs and supervisors, and others as well. And I think that most people in this audience can identify with one of these circles, perhaps one that we didn't mention and so on, but are working in one or perhaps spanning a couple of these areas. If we were in a room, I'd have everyone do a show of hands of where they sorted, but that doesn't work. But the point is that there's a lot of different people in different units in the university working on this issue. And that's great. It's also, of course, a challenge. You see, because the capacity, of course, is dispersed and coordination is limited. There's all these people working on the problem, but there's a lot of issues that we keep saying about capacity and coordination. Who's in charge? How do we respond? How do we do our best efforts here? So we want to talk about this. And we want to base this on the research that I mentioned that we've done. We've been doing a lot of research on this for a few years. We also have a book, as many of you will know, Work Your Career, Get What You Want, Your Social Sciences and Humanities PhD. We've also been doing some research and publishing in scholarly journals on this, particularly in the discipline of political science. Most of our work has been focusing on the one discipline, but we've also been doing a lot of multidisciplinary work as well, in interviews with graduate professional development staff and others. So we've got a large body of research that we want to draw on here today. As I mentioned, some of the research we have done with Lisa Young at the University of Calgary, so she's been a collaborator on some of this work as well. I'm going to stop talking at this point and turn it over to Lillian.
Great, thank you. And just, oh, is it? There we go. I wanted to make sure I could advance slides. One thing I just did want to mention as well is to acknowledge and thank the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada for supporting and funding our work. So I'm going to start by talking about the extent to which our research indicates that there is interest in and support for change and rethinking how we approach graduate education. We focus particularly on PhDs, but I believe it has implications for graduate studies more broadly, including master's level thinking. So the first thing to note is that that people don't have their heads completely in the sand. There's always the examples that people will point to of truly clueless, Professor X, usually a white guy of a certain age, that he sent in a job application back in the 60s and wasn't even, didn't even have a campus interview and just waltzed into it. I don't think there's many people out there that still have any sense that the academic job market is easy at all. We don't see that type of denial about things. When we asked if you could tell students in Canadian political science PhD programs one thing about preparing for careers, what we saw was that, this was an open-ended question. We saw people really demonstrating that they see this as a competitive environment, and that people need to prepare for different realities. So we see that we have faculty that are increasingly aware of these issues. Just to give you some greater sense of this, in terms of these questions, we have people that were saying that this is not a guarantee. The majority are going to end up elsewhere. Things are tough. Be prepared for a tough academic job market. And so we have this sort of foundational grounding of faculty, and we think that's important because faculty are ultimately, in a university environment, the ones who decide curriculum and who decide what's happening at a program level. At the same time, we see that faculty report that they don't give preference to academic careers and to academic, that they don't see themselves as not being supportive of other career options. So we have a number of questions there, and we saw that it's really minority of faculty who are taking this academic only approach in terms of their thinking. We also see that the majority of faculty, so if we look at the green bars there, the majority of faculty do agree that programs should be looking at including transferable career skills, which we think is a positive indication of some level of support. When we turn to what department chairs think, because department chairs are going to be the ones that direct and orient these conversations, we see that the chairs feel that there are unit level responsibilities. They think that this is something that needs to be done at the program level. And they are at the same time highly supportive of the university level engaging in this topic, that graduate faculties are in their minds a very important partner. And we also see from the students that the students expect professional development. So we have some quotations from students that we spoke to in focus groups, and they see this as being an important responsibility for programs and for the institutions. So that's the good news foundation. Well, I'll let Jonathan take you through some of the challenges.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we want to move now a bit. As we said earlier, like there seems to be fairly high awareness, not universal certainly, but most faculty, chairs, and chairs seem to be generally thinking about these issues and are aware of them here, etc. What we want to focus on simply is that increasingly think that attitudes are not the primary barrier for responding to the PhD jobs crisis. Still important. I don't want to downplay it. That we have found some dinosaurs there, but they're rare. We think that this is not the main issue now. It's ongoing, but it's not the main issue. Whereas it's more the organizational, the capacity, and the coordination issues, and the lack of consensus in the long-term strategies. Those are the big barriers now. Those are the ones which are hard to overcome, that are really challenging, I think, any response to this issue of what I'll call the PhD jobs crisis here. And so we want to shift now and show some more data and research based more on this, on organizational capacity issues, not just general awareness and support issues here. We'll begin with a quote from University Affairs by Jonathan Turner, who's with the University of Toronto Graduate Professional Development Faculty Graduate Studies. I'll read the quote here, that one of the biggest challenges identified for graduate professional and career development programs is the lack of clear communication, both within and between universities. Students often have no clue that there are programs on their campus to help them. And one of the reasons students and postdocs may not be aware of these initiatives is that faculty in their department might not know what is provided centrally. So it's about awareness and issues here. And that quote is from 3 years ago. Things maybe improved a little bit. I don't think that, though, that they've hugely changed in the last three years. Yeah. So awareness and coordination and communication, we think, are key issues here. We mentioned a moment ago, we showed that sort of universe of the university here. One thing that's just really striking is clearly that capacity and access are dispersed in this area. So if you look at the two big circles, in the one circle, we have the university level, which can include, we're including faculty of graduate studies and other of that level there, career centers and others there, where generally you find capacity and expertise. That's where you do find professional development staff, people trained in this area who think about this all day, who are really qualified and have some capacity and skills in this area. So that's where the expertise is. But the unit level, the other side, well, that's where the students are. That's, of course, the disciplinary context, and that's where the cultural and attitudinal norms are transmitted. Because graduate education, in particular, tends to be very focused in the department or program or school that way. That's usually the main world of students, rooted in the discipline, rooted in cultural and attitudinal norms. And the two other actors we see here in the middle are the supervisor, of course, who can be an independent agent there, and then finally the student themselves, who of course is the focus of all this. And our point here again is that the university level in particular tends to have the capacity. It's the unit level that tends to have more of the access, and the supervisor is a very important intervening variable here as well. So when we look at this, is where we see these issues arising. When we ask chairs about whether or not their units have the relevant expertise for non-academic paths, you'll see basically a complete lack of consensus here, but a lot of skepticism like that. We asked the chairs, are faculty well equipped to help PhD students pursue non-academic paths? The majority said no, and if only a small number, the blues, supported that. And they actually polarized quite a bit where the supervisors themselves felt less equipped. So again, there's really no consensus whether or not there's a lot of expertise at the unit level on training for non-academic careers. We asked faculty themselves about this again. Do you feel equipped to help PhD students pursue non-academic paths? And you'll see again that most didn't. So the red and orange are that they don't feel equipped, and you see that's about a majority. And then others weren't sure. Some did agree. As you can see, it's not entirely one-sided, but certainly the majority did not feel equipped to support non-academic paths. So the actual expertise, not surprisingly, is not necessarily found at the unit level and among the supervisor level. Students also feel that way. Again, I won't read all the quotes here, but again, students reported some similar feelings that they didn't expect departments to provide a lot of non-academic capacity and expertise for non-academic positions, again, so they were aware of that. But at the same time, it's not like all the solutions are simply at the university level. So we asked students as well about, about the university level, and we also got a lot of skepticism there, either about sort of resources, access, or whether or not particularly it fit disciplinary norms. And that was something that came up a lot, is that they really found the university level programming often a bit too general, and they're very oriented around the department and discipline, and very skeptical often of the university level there. So so students are skeptical both sides, to put it simply there. Another thing that students mentioned is that a lot of programming, particularly at the university level again, was essentially a luxury. They didn't have time for. So again, I won't read all the quotes there, but notice particularly on the left-hand side, you'll notice time comes up again and again like that. We just don't have time for this, particularly for university level programming, for extra workshops, things like that. A lot of students said, we just don't have time for that, particularly in the early years of a graduate program there. So again, a lot of feeling that both they didn't have confidence in departments to develop and to deliver this non-academic expertise, but they also felt they didn't have the time or necessarily wasn't a great fit for the university level program either, which of course is where the capacity tends to be.
Can I just jump in here, Jonathan? I just wanted to note for everybody that one of my favorite quotations is on this slide. That year is completely booked, and I remember the student saying that. So it's like I don't have 5 minutes that entire year. So they really do feel a lot of time pressure. So
yeah. So, and just a couple more points of research here. We want to shift here to the other issue of really what's the long-term response. We showed earlier that faculty and chairs are generally concerned about this issue. They think about it here, but we also asked them very directly, okay, what's the big solution here? What's the long-term solution? And it's basically all over the place. So we asked faculty two separate questions. One is whether, if PhD students are not getting jobs, should we reduce the number of PhD students that we take in? So decrease. And the other one is, should departments explicitly build the development of skills into the PhD curriculum? So adapt the program, not just extracurricular programming, but actually adapt the PhD curriculum. And then so we present here the responses, people that agreed or disagree with each statement. So it adds up to 100% in 4 quadrants. And if you look, only 15%, the lower right, only 15% said don't do anything, don't decrease the numbers, and don't adapt it. Only 15% sort of said basically no change at all. But if you look at the other squares, you'll see that they're pretty much split evenly, 3 different ways. 1/3 said we should decrease number of PhD students and adapt the programs. Others said we should decrease it but don't change the program, and others said we should adapt it but don't decrease it. So I'm not seeing a consensus forward there at all. In fact, it's really quite remarkable how it's split almost pretty evenly 3 ways here. And this is what we mean by the challenge, is that people are aware of this issue. They certainly support sort of workshops and sort of programming things here. But in terms of long-term solution, there's no clear a way forward among faculty. There's no consensus that we could find. We asked chairs a similar question about building skills into curriculum. Should we, again, much like the second one there about adapting curriculum, and what I'll just summarize the chart as saying that they're all over the place. You can see it's spread. Some agreed, some disagreed. A few agreed or disagreed there. So it's not hugely polarized. We're in a lot of strong agree or strong disagree, but it's clear there was no consensus among the chairs either about whether to adapt PhD programs or not. So again, there's really, people are aware of this, but what exactly what are the big solutions? What are the big changes? There's no consensus on the way forward. One more slide, and then I'll turn over to Laleen again, is we also asked faculty, and I'm sorry if the chart is a little hard to read. We asked faculty again, who should be responsible for career preparation in PhD programs at the university? And we gave them 5 options, and they divided them among students themselves, who should be responsible for career preparation, departments, graduate faculties, PhD supervisors, and university career centers. And also that most felt the students themselves should be most responsible. Other than that, it's fairly even. And I want to point out particularly that we did also compare this by university. And we looked at the top 3 universities in Canada, by which we mean McGill, Toronto, and UBC. And we did find statistically significant differences there. If you can see the blue, that's the top 3, they were most likely to say it's the students' job themselves to be in charge of professional development, and slightly less for departments and graduate faculty. So we just highlight that. We also have the U15 universities, which there wasn't statistical significance, not that different from all, but similarly there. So the takeaway here again is that there's no consensus about how to respond to this, but also it's a real distributed responsibility view. There's no sense of total ownership of the issue at the unit level, yet they're not willing to give up control either. And so as the phrase says here, there's this feeling that this is everybody's job. And as you know, often if it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. So that's our issue here. Lillian, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. And actually, Jonathan, a real quick question that came up that Tamara asked was if there were splits along disciplinary lines. My recollection was that the theorists stood out a little bit, the political theorists stood out a little bit in terms of being the least interested in change. Jonathan, you can correct me if I'm wrong in that, but.
Yeah, so these are political science faculty, so it's just within one discipline within political science. So we did find some differences among the different fields for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So,
but not huge differences though.
No, they were fairly modest. So yeah. The question then is, well, how can leaders move this forward? How do we create change in universities, which can be challenging to create change in, and we've got 3 areas that we'd like to suggest. One is coordination, the second is information, and then the last is incentivization. So in terms of coordination, I think this is a very interesting first step, and really we don't see an argument either logical or practical to say, okay, well, bump it all up to the university level, or bump it all down to the unit level. It's there's different parts bring different strengths, and so there's a challenge really to bring these together rather than to try to create these sort of watertight, you do this, you do that, and that sort of thing. We do think there's a lot of opportunity and need to really strengthen links. We've got between the university level and the unit level. I'd also say between different elements of the university level as well. So unrelated to this project, but a very specific project that I've worked on at the University of Saskatchewan is looking how we can do this in a very practical way at our university. And part of the challenge is figuring out who's doing what. And there's a lot of goodwill, a lot of actors, but coordination is a real challenge, and so bringing people together, strengthening the links, having an understanding of who's on this larger team is really important, and then of course sharing resources and coordinating messaging to students. It can be really confusing for students to know where they're supposed to go, how they're supposed to access services, and so on. And so the need for some type of central hub that serves a coordinating role, I think, is something that should be considered as universities try to create some kind of change on this front. Information. So there's quite often a lack of information. It might be entirely at the university level. It might be might exist at the university level, but not be fully known at the unit level. But tracking of where PhDs go. Alumni offices sometimes have this information. They sometimes don't want to share this information, but just knowing what happens to PhD students, not just graduates, but all PhD students, the ones that leave the program without completing, where they end up and where they, how things are going for them. There needs to be some greater understanding of where employers see opportunities to engage with university students, what skills they see as valuable. This would be, some communication and information gathering on that front. And it's also, we think, an important thing for students and prospective students to have access to this information. A lot of students enter programs with very little understanding of average completion times, average completion rates, where people end up. And having this information available to students would really help students make much more informed choices. Third thing we note is incentivization. And so we think the incentive structures can be a bit problematic and can provide a bit of a barrier for change. So right now there's incentives that are in some ways implicit, in some ways explicit, for academic PhD programs that really don't fit the reality of where students end up. So faculty, for example, are incentivized to develop very large research teams that advance their own research interests and programs that lead to training of students, and a real need for, well, I need a certain number of PhD students each year for my program, but is that really of interest to the students themselves? So those kind of incentives, I think, need to be considered at the university level. There needs to be some kind of incentives for units to take this on in a very integrated way in their programs. Some thought in terms of, well, what can be done to make it easier for them to do that, and to reward them for doing so. Faculty are, they have a lot of things going on. So, finding ways to make it very easy for them to understand what's going on in terms of professional development at the university would be very valuable. And making it easy for coordination. Earlier there was, Jonathan had the slide that, if it's everybody's responsibility, it's nobody's responsibility. Who's going to lead coordination? And finding ways to support this in the university is something that we see as being quite important. So we haven't mentioned the C word yet, and I think it's important to bring this up right now. COVID changes everything, of course, and it has a role to play here. So things were already challenging. COVID makes it more so. We have increased student anxiety. Staff, faculty are all, trying to adapt in very uncertain environments. And that creates further challenges. There's, of course, the idea that we shouldn't let a good crisis go to waste. And I think COVID presents some potential opportunities on this front. People, I think, might be more open to change in that the awareness of the stresses on graduate students, I think, are harder and harder to ignore. People might be more willing to work together and to work together within institutions and across different levels and institutions. And there's a real opportunity for graduate faculties to launch some discussions on this front, and for department chairs to launch discussions on this front, to say, look, what we're doing wasn't working before, it's really not working now. So how can we rethink this? So I'll turn it back to you, Jonathan.
Okay, so we have come near the end here. So the conclusion here, I'll just restate things that you just heard, really, that we think PhD career outcomes are a growing organizational and leadership issue. Again, it's an issue, it's certainly an issue of attitudes at all levels and things there. We think there's really more and more complex sort of what we'll call back-end questions at the university that really raise organizational leadership issues here. And as we mentioned, I think leaders at all levels, regardless of one's role and position here, have opportunities, I think, to facilitate change here, as we said, through coordination, through information. I'll say also information, I think, that we've, particularly the issue of gathering career outcomes and things there. Some universities, of course, have done that. U of T did its 10,000 PhDs project. UBC did a similar big collection a little while ago and things there. One thing that I think we really need to know is, when as Lillian said, is people that don't finish a PhD program, what's the outcome there? And the other is career satisfaction, because we can track where people are ending up. What we can't track as easily is how satisfied they are with that career outcome and whether or not they feel that the PhD allowed them to achieve that career outcome. That's more complicated to gather there, etc. And the most important thing is incentivization. Like there are some big incentives to keep on taking in more PhDs all the time. There's no secret there, and not a lot of incentives to really change, adapt, or respond accordingly to this issue. So I think there's a lot really that can be done there. So that ends our formal presentation. We do have a couple of discussion questions we'd like to throw out to the group. As we mentioned, we'd be quite happy if people added their responses to this question or others in the chat, and we would like to spend the remainder of the time here hearing what you have to say and your responses to this, as well as your responses to these questions. And if anyone comes from an institution that solved all these issues and there's no problem, please let us know.
Just to let you know, in the chat, if you click on the question mark at the top, it will filter out any questions, because I've marked specific questions. So we have so far one from Tamara Kelly.
Okay, right. Yes, and I think we responded to Tamara.
Okay.
I think somewhat there earlier. It's good. Thank you. I also I noticed, Holly, you very much affirmed some of our issues here about how really units and areas responding to this are so devolved. As you said, support is so devolved and comes from such a range of teams that PhDs find it difficult to navigate and know what's available to them and how to access it. There's no single point of access. And I'm sure that is quite true. As I said, you work in this area and things that I think universities are trying, but there's a lot of different people at universities working on this. And each of them are often working on other things. So, for example, Career Center is serving undergraduates as well as graduates. Line faculties have a role here as well as graduate faculties. There are many, many others. And each university is a little different, so the configuration is going to be different in each case. I just build on that to say it also means that for students, it means more than ever the department and home unit tends to be the one point of reference. That regardless of the rest of the university, which is all a big sort of mass, they do know their program, their unit, and that's what they tend to turn to first, even though everyone agrees that the expertise really isn't there for non-academic career programming. Other comments or questions?
I just created a poll.
Oh, right.
I'm curious to see what people think.
Sure.
There. And thank you, Holly. Holly writes, my experience working in career services and being a PhD-specific career advisor is that relationships with faculty are everything. And I think that's a great point. Thank you, Holly. One thing in some of my research that I did on behalf of my own university is I did a lot of discussions with staff who work in graduate professional development, and that was something that came up quite regularly, was trying to connect with individual faculty champions, that if you find the people that were part of who wanted to advance this, it could make a very large difference for an individual unit. At the same time, there can be a bit of a challenge is that if that one person initiates a lot of things that rely on that one individual, the potential for burnout and thus non-sustainability can be a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thanks. Thanks for the questions here. So a question from Kimberly Spears, and Kim, nice to Kim and I knew each other at University of Waterloo in a previous century. The question here, sorry, things just moving here. Did you look at the difference between public admin and political science in this program? As I said, we did look in political science by field. And so we said there were some differences between, say, political theorists on one side, the most theoretical, of course, and public policy that tends to be the most empirically focused. But again, they weren't hugely different at the PhD level, and not in any huge significant. I don't think they were statistically significant at all. And whether we think it's the same for masters of public admin students at the master's level and that, I think for more professional-based programs, it can be different. Students that are going into professional programs do tend to be focused very much on professional job outcomes. So they're more interested, I think, by default in training, and the programs themselves are more focused. So it's much easier, for example, to build in government training, obviously, in a public admin program. That for master's students, not necessarily. If master's students are focused on a research career and going into PhD, they're going to, I think, show similar patterns to the PhD level. Lena, anything to add? And I see Isabel has a question as well.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Okay. I said thank you for everyone's comments here. Just here. Allison Flynn, you asked about whether information about the effects of having aspects that are integrated in the program rather than separated or optional extras. I'm going to take it means sort of giving PhD students more information about different things that they can do or different tracks they could take or something like that, perhaps there. It could be. I mean, as we said, we want to eventually, we have to do a full survey of students eventually. We've done focus groups with students in political science and in other disciplines. We do know that students enter PhD programs with a number of different attitudes, but generally a lot of confidence. And one thing we've certainly developed, and others have also documented, is that when students enter an academic PhD program, they're often aware of the job market odds, but they're convinced they can beat the odds. Because after all, they were at the top of their class as undergraduates, perhaps in their master's levels. They assume that, again, they can exceed expectations, not realizing that when they enter the PhD program, everyone else is at that same level. And that's something we picked up in the focus groups a bit elsewhere, is that particularly students when they first enter programs are overconfident about the academic job market. They know about it, but they're overconfident based on their past experience, which unfortunately is not applicable anymore.
Yeah, and then just related to that, then of course there become growing concerns about graduate student mental health, because quite often that overconfidence, if and when it is corrected, that can be very, very jarring for individuals, and there can be a sense of isolation and competition with peers, and that can be a bit of a challenge. I see another question here from Isabel. She writes, we really need to examine our graduate curriculum. What messages do our hidden curriculum send to our students? How does the hidden curriculum affect our students' choices of career? And I think that's a great question, and it's something that I think is of particular concern as programs try to attract and engage and retain greater diversity in terms of students, in terms of international students and first generation students, and it can be, can create some particular challenges. One thing I'm really struck by in terms of my engagement with faculty is that I do find that a lot of faculty come into academia having had no other career experience. And so I was not that way, but I'm very much an exception to that rule. And so it's very natural for faculty and thus supervisors to have that as their default. And so even faculty who are trying to be open-minded and trying to be supportive of alternate careers tend to use what we refer to as an academia first approach, which is, well, you really need to prepare for all sorts of careers, and so that means you should publish a lot. And it's like, well, I really don't know that, that they do have trouble sort of making that mental leap because it's a new world to them. Jonathan,
yeah,
on that?
Yeah, I think like what we found in some of our, we didn't present some of the survey data here, is there is still an academia first mentality. We said most faculty are aware that it's hard to get an academic job. That's very competitive out there, but it's still clearly plan A, and anything else is plan B. So there's a rank order. And so there is this implicit idea that, well, you should try your best to get an academic job, and if not, well, we've got to be open-minded to plan B and backup and stuff like that. But so they're open-minded, but it's clearly a ranking. That's something that we certainly found in the faculty surveys as well and stuff. They're aware, but there is a ranking priority for sure as well. Let's keep going with the questions here. Jen asks about whether or not, if there's agreement on academic objectives, perhaps nothing would necessarily have to be watered down. And well, we agree. We think that certainly PhD programs can be adapted to build in more professional skill development directly into the curriculum. We think there's lots of things to do. It does involve more effort, though. It does involve overhauling a lot of things there. And I think the one way in which most departments and programs agree on things is they simply agree to everything. So what's our academic objectives? You agree to more and more and more. So often, so trying to actually integrate the stuff into the program without expanding it even further, I think is the challenge. Most people would say, yeah, we could integrate this stuff, but we can't leave anything out and so on. The only way we can do it is add absolutely everything in that way and so on. So we think it is doable, but it's hard work. It's not something you can just sort of quickly overhaul or have one meeting on and change. It's a long-term project, frankly.
Jen, you wrote "What a mess." I hope you mean about the system and not us personally. If I walked my laptop around the house, I would take that very personally, but it's true. I do think as well that that what happens with the academic programs is they're put in place at a point in time and then periodically reviewed. But there does need to be this stepping back at times to say, okay, well, what are the larger program objectives? What are the learning outcomes for programs? And I can say that in developing new programs, I'm optimistic about people thinking about these things going forward. But to sort of go back and retrofit can be a bit of a challenge. So I was part of an external review for a proposal for a new program, not at my university, and they had done a very impressive job of taking all these realities into account and building it in. And I was like, wow, this, the new things coming out. Make these changes a lot more easily than things that are in place. And the things that are in place, of course.
Okay. Lily, maybe cut out there quickly there. Hopefully she'll be back with us moment there. But I'll keep talking and commenting some things that have been pointed out.
I'm back. Sorry. I guess the internet did not like what I had to say, and it completely kicked me out there. But yeah, I was just going to say that change is hard.
Okay. I'll just respond to Tanya Schwartz. Tanya asks about what about the cultural issue? I found that there is some serious pushback from certain, not all, but certain faculty members who prioritize academic careers over non-academic careers. How do we deal with this? I mean, I certainly agree, Tanya. And one thing that, I mean, the data we're presenting is Canadian, and I know you're from the United States, and it'd be interesting to know, we'd love to be able to run this survey on the scale for the United States to see if there are differences. And anecdotally, I do wonder if there might be a little more of a stronger academia first mentality, particularly at the most prestigious American universities, but that's just purely anecdotal guessing at some point. Regardless, so I think it certainly touches on the issue that even faculty are generally aware of the PhD jobs crisis, not all, but most are, but still there's this idea of academia first, that in the end, anything else is purely a backup. You gotta train and do everything you can to get that big gold prize there of an academic job. But if not, well, that's okay. That's okay. And to pick up on what Kim also says in the comments there, Kim Spears, there's a feeling then that, well, that's not good enough. That, well, you weren't good enough to get an academic job. Too bad, like that. So that's a very difficult cultural issue to deal with there, because it's very entrenched. It's often transmitted implicitly. I won't give the whole story now, but even I've experienced this with my own PhD students, with one in particular, where I was very supportive of non-academic job outcomes, but I didn't make that super clear, I guess. I didn't say to really clear to the PhD student, hey, whatever job you get is good. This is all fine there, and so on. So even I've transmitted kind of implicit academia first messages, certainly without intending to do so. And that's huge. And then it's reinforced by university disciplinary cultures, the fact that just all sorts of things reinforce that. So to get to the question of how do we deal with this? It's very difficult, very slowly. We think that there is room for adapting curriculum, and that's where we think that universities, particularly university leaders, people at the university level, can do their part by reducing incentives to take on more PhD students than we can accept, by really pushing programs to integrate career development there. We think that's a leadership issue. We think it's not just changing mentality or sort of like that. This is about big resource and coordination issues. They're not small things.
I will say just a few other things, though, is I think there's basically a systemic bias in terms of a lot of people's thinking. And so in order to get around that, it requires some conscious thinking of, well, what messages are we sending? So at the back of Work Your Career, we have this faculty call to action of things that we think faculty should be doing. And some of those are being very conscious about things. Like if there's a department website that talks about, our successful graduate students, and it highlights all the ones that, completed their programs and ended up in academic jobs, and neglects to note the ones that, left the program because they ended up with this other excellent job, or, completed their program and ended up doing something else. A message is being sent by that. And so, consciously looking at those types of things, I think is very valuable. I'm really struck by, a lot of university, a lot of programs, they talk about their placement rate. We were able to place this many students, and so that's our success.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, then I guess the others are what? So.
Yeah. We've got lots of great comments here, and so I'll just respond. Tanya also mentioned about someone in her cohort who told her supervisor that she was looking at non-academic jobs, and the supervisor dropped. Can't find the comment here again, but I read that there. I'm very sorry to hear that, and absolutely it happened. I said we think attitudes are improving. It's good there, as we've been saying here, but there are, let's call them dinosaurs. They're certainly out there, and so we're not saying that this is not. There isn't some very basic problems here going on, in addition to sort of this sort of high-end, longer term response things we're talking about here.
And Lorraine writes, I'm 4 years past PhD completion. My supervisor still sends me tenure track job vacancies and reminds me I will be too late to apply for them. Wow.
That's,
and I'm sure actually that supervisor thinks that he or she is being supportive. And that's yeah.
Yeah, it's always plan A there.
Yeah.
Paul Jenkins asks about any thoughts about UBC's PhD co-op programs and other ways we can improve or smooth the absorption of grad students in other sectors. I'm not familiar with the UBC program specifically. I do know that the co-op for PhD students is being developed in internships and other sort of programs that are usually seen at the undergrad level there. And the short answer is these are great things. These are really good things. I think the two issues, one again is how supportive programs are integrating them into the regular program, or is it add-on? Is it an extra? We think it's often an extra, but I don't know the UBC program specifically there. The other thing, as with undergrad, is that co-op isn't cheap. Co-op and internship programs you need resources, you need a lot of professional support to do them correctly and so on. And universities need to devote resources to that. It's a money issue, simple as that. Traditional academia is actually, it's cheap. It's the cheapest way of doing things. Anything else does require a lot of resources and work.
Yeah, and a lot of building connections, and it's not really just a matter of opening up the co-op program and letting the PhD students be part of it, and forcing the PhD students to compete with undergrad students to get different co-op placements. So there's a real challenge. It's not just opening up the co-op spots. It's making sure that co-op positions would be appropriate for PhD students. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. But I think there's also a need to think as well, what are we doing with the comps and the dissertation? And how does the whole program function, and how can we prepare people for multiple things? I'm a little reluctant to have things work out in terms of, well, your academic stream and your non-academic stream, because I think that just I do wonder if there's a way to do a more holistic thinking about this. One other thing, and then I'll stop talking because I see a lot of comments that we should respond to, is I do think that we need to do a better job in graduate education of having a way for people to exit programs if they are in the position of wanting to do so. I know a lot of American programs, because they take direct entry from bachelor's into PhD programs, which I have opinions about, that then they use the master's degree as sort of this exit point. But in Canada, where most people have a master's degree when they enter into a PhD, are there other venues that we can think creatively about? But
yeah, thanks. Okay, we're coming to the end here. I do want to respond to a couple of very quick things there. Kim Spears asked again about any feedback from workplaces about PhD students, and we've not talked to employers about this. But in terms of educating the workforce about the value of the PhD, I mean, I think, yes. And I think anyone who works in university career centers knows this is a bit of the holy grail, working with employers, getting the employers to actually say what they want and then follow through with what they say they want. And there's often a distinction. They say they want one thing, they hire another thing there. That's a constant issue, particularly when it's more open-ended as with the PhD, which depending on discipline can go in a lot of different directions there. So it's a tough thing. This again, it's not an easy solution there. Also, Isabel mentioned briefly the granting agencies and we agree the funding agencies, again, we want to acknowledge SSHRC is funding this research. We appreciate that. But frankly, a lot of the funding agencies, are about training graduate students for academic positions and supporting academic projects and stuff there. And again, we're not sure that's entirely helpful for this situation there.
There is a great model that NSERC has called the CREATE grants. They're really hard competitive grants to get, but they really build in professional development. So perhaps there's opportunity for the other granting agencies to go in that direction.
Yeah, they are. I mean, certainly they're thinking a lot about this. SSHRC and NSERC and CIHR are all thinking about this for sure. But it's, as we've been saying, it's complicated. So we've come to the end of the hour, so I think it's time for us to wrap up. We just want to thank everyone for coming. We want to encourage you to please follow up with us. You can look us up in email or simply contact or follow us on Twitter. Easiest way here. We'll plug our book there one more time as well, which is directed directly at students in navigating PhD programs. We do want to thank you very much. I just want to thank again the CHUR, the University of Manitoba, for this. I want to thank Tara DeCastro, who's been labeling all the questions here. So Tara, thanks very much. That's very helpful for following things there. And I want to thank you very much. And I'll turn over to Lillian.
Yeah, no, we really hope that we'll see continuing discussions on these topics. And we do find academic Twitter to be a point where a lot of important ideas seem to bubble out. So we encourage you to take these ideas back and hope we can continue this conversation.
All right, so thank you very much, and have a good Wednesday.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.